My name is Megan Nance, and I will be presenting my MAT Capstone project, which will include my philosophy of education, significant learning events, experience with conducting research within the classroom, and my conclusion. Going into my freshman year of college, I was confident I wanted to become an educator. I just knew. But like most others, my path wasn't straight. I ended up taking a detour and spent over 10 years in corporate health and wellness before finding myself back with teaching. 10 years in the corporate world was enough for me to realize that wasn't for me. My work wasn't meaningful, and yet again, crossing another unexpected event, the pandemic happened, and I was left with the choice of whether to homeschool my children or not. I committed to it, and shortly after, I was back on the right path. I had found my purpose, teaching. Now I answer with I get to instead of I have to when people ask what I do. I believe in providing a positive learning environment for students, which includes setting high expectations for all students. Students need teachers who demand that they perform and push them to accomplish things that they did not believe they could do. A practical example from my classroom that sticks out to me is a student who would not participate, especially during whole group math. He was living up to low expectations that were set for him. His scores were low and he was placed in a low performing group. He knew this. No one would push him, and I noticed when I did attempt to help him, he expected me to do the work for him. That's what he was used to, performing to low expectations that were set for him. One day during an exit ticket, he was giving up. I looked at him and said, "Do not give up. I know how you feel. I have felt this before. But you can do this, and I expect that you can do this." I had him take a deep breath and orally explain the answer to me, and he did. He needed confidence and high expectations. He needed a teacher that believed in him and didn't just let him get by. Moving forward, I would not let him get away with not finishing work, and I encouraged participation during whole group math. I would over the course of 5 months. And over the course of 5 months, I saw him go from being an often absent student who refused to participate to a student who confidently rose his hand during whole group and completed all of his work. Near the end of my internship, he introduced me to his mom and said, "I think Mrs. Nance is one of the greatest teachers." I often wondered if I was too tough on him. His comment confirmed that building a relationship of trust and confidence along with high expectations is what students need to succeed. I also believe in providing a classroom that supports students in becoming globally confident. Students will be working for international companies, collaborating with people to solve global issues and manage people from many different cultures. We need to prepare students to be globally confident. This includes providing instructional practices that consistently has students collaborating with peers, thinking critically, and solving problems. Students need to understand international issues and working with people with diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. We need to support students in appreciating different cultures and see through the lens of others. Garrett Tomlinson said, "Global education is not something added to a teacher's plate, it is the plate." Geneva Gay, a theorist for culturally responsive teaching, defined culturally responsive teaching as a framework that supports instruction based on a student's cultural background and life experiences. I believe in learning about my students' cultures and embracing them to create effective instruction. We need to embrace our students' culture and make it relevant to learning and provide instruction that leads to equity in the classroom. Practical examples of this within my classroom include using multicultural materials, using scaffolds to support language, using cognates from students' native language to support vocabulary, small group instruction, valuing and respecting students' native language, and learning how to pronounce all students' names correctly. A significant learning event that occurred during my graduate studies was the importance of differentiating instruction within the classroom. Carol Ann Tomlinson is an educator who is known for her work in differentiated instruction. She stated, "Differentiation is simply a teacher attending to the learning needs of a particular student or small groups of students rather than teaching a class as though all individuals were basically alike." Much of Tomlinson's theories and ideas were derived from Dr. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. He believed that students had different learning styles and preferences. He referred to these as 8 different intelligences, which support the idea that students learn in diverse ways. My classroom included secondary language learners, students with IEPs and 504s, and academically gifted students. Every person and student is different and therefore will learn different. As a future educator, I learned to utilize evidence-based teaching practices to provide instruction that supported the learning needs of all of my students. First, I noticed the importance of same and mixed ability groups. I use same ability groups for small group reading. I found that mixed ability groups work great during paired math work. Students who understand the concept or skill can practice it by explaining orally to the other student, while the other student benefits from additional instruction from their peer in a one-on-one setting. Mixed ability works great when students are reading in pairs when there is a proficient reader paired with a secondary language learner. Another way I differentiated content was using leveled reading text. Raz Kids offers the same reading passages in leveled reading. Students that may still be at grade 2 reading level can read the same passage as students who are reading grade 4 content. This resource also provided leveled comprehension quizzes. Other strategies I use to differentiate instruction include providing directions written in shorter sentences and simpler words for struggling readers and secondary language learners, providing extensions and advanced assignments to AIG students who mastered the lesson sooner than other students, providing different ways for students to show what they learned, and offering additional time for assessments. The most important thing I learned about differentiating instruction was what Larry Ferlazzo stated: fair isn't always equal. In fact, fairness is the opposite. Fairness is treating students according to their needs. My goal for the future is to focus on providing differentiated lessons in a diverse classroom. A third significant learning event occurred when I created a concept-based inquiry approach unit plan on water. The focus was including sustainable development goals. The goal of SCG is to end poverty, reduce inequality, and protect the planet by 2030. The goals I addressed were goal number 6, clean water and sanitation, and goal number 12, responsible consumption and production. Lesson 1 included the water cycle and states of matter. Lesson 2 included causes and effects of water pollution, and Lesson 3 included water scarcity and water conservation. What I loved most about creating this unit is it involved teaching students that being global citizens is important for building a sustainable future. In Lesson 3, students learned about water scarcity and conservation. In order to provide a global perspective on water pollution, part of my lesson included students watching a video on water pollution in Indonesia and in the Cape Fear River. Students looked for patterns and connections between the two case studies and were able to generalize that humans impact the environment through the use and disposal of natural resources. By the end, students understood that toxic pollution and chemicals caused by humans in all areas of the world are contaminating our water sources and other resources like the fish we eat. In order to teach students to become responsible global citizens, we want to empower them to make a change. For the next assignment, I had students create posters to promote water pollution and conservation around their community. Students connected with water conservationists and the Cape Fear Water and Utility Company to ask them if they would post their posters to their social media pages. By the end, students understood that responsible citizens can make positive changes within the community by protecting and conserving natural resources such as water. Finally, students worked collaboratively in small groups to take action project that involved completing a video on raising awareness about water conservation. This project supported learning tasks of a global citizen of the 21st century by working collaboratively in small groups on projects to solve a local problem, engaging in critical thinking, utilizing creativity by creating their own video, and communication by reaching out to local conservationists and water and utility companies. According to UNESCO, education for sustainable development empowers learners of all ages with the knowledge and attitudes to address the interconnected global challenges we are facing. We must provide students and learners of all ages to find solutions for the challenges of today and in the future. Zoe Weil, president of the Institute of Humane Education, stated that solutionary education does not require a curriculum, but it does require teachers to believe in their students' abilities to contribute to a better world and provide opportunities to do so. We need to support students' curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration in the classroom through units like the one I described. As a future teacher, I am committed to modeling solutionary thinking, connecting traditional curriculum to relevant global issues like the unit plan I described, and personalizing instruction to meet the interests and needs of each one of my students. As I mentioned, this was an inquiry-based learning unit. It can be considered a constructivist learning environment because the teacher creates a collaborative environment where students are actively involved in their own learning. John Dewey believed that learners who engaged in real-world activities will be able to demonstrate higher levels of knowledge through creativity and collaboration. Dewey said, if you have doubts about how learning happens, engage in sustained inquiry. Study, ponder, and consider alternative possibilities and arrive at your belief grounded in evidence. Dewey emphasized inquiry-based learning. Just like Dewey, I believe that learners need to connect real-life experiences to classroom activities to make learning possible. Research I conducted in the classroom was identifying if learner engagement increased when more culturally responsive texts were included in literacy instruction. Holly defined culturally authentic text as the preferred type of text for culturally responsive educators because they focus on authentic experiences that include religion, socioeconomic status, gender, nationality, geographic location, sexual orientation, and ethnicity in an authentic manner. Culturally generic texts include characters with racial identities, but they lack details about the character or storyline. Culturally neutral texts are primarily race-based with traditional themes. Early in my internship, I noticed that students lacked engagement, and I wondered if including more culturally authentic texts in my literacy instruction would increase engagement. I believe that when students feel represented within texts, it creates a meaningful connection that increases engagement and motivation. According to culturally responsive teaching, theory, research, and practice, Geneva Gay defines culturally responsive pedagogy as the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames for reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to and effective for them. Utilizing culturally responsive text is part of a culturally responsive pedagogy and should be used in conjunction. Together, they act as a powerful tool that can engage students in learning that allows them to see the relationship between personal experiences and experiences they have at school. The use of culturally relevant texts anchor students' culturally relevant knowledge, such as their identities, experiences, and norms, and ways to improve their literacy outcomes. Students can use their background knowledge to construct meaning from text, which increases engagement and comprehension. The participants in this study were 15 fourth graders, which consisted of 10 boys and 5 girls, 8 white students, 2 African American, 4 Hispanic, and 1 which is 2 or more races. Students had read 5 texts over a 3-week time period, which included Elizabeth Blackwell, The First Woman Doctor by Richard Mattis, Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad by Terry Miller Shannon, Clara Barton, The Angel of the Battlefield by Catherine Follett, One Crazy Summer by Rita Williams Garcia, and Behind Rebel Lines by Seymour Wright. I collected data during whole group and small groups over the 3 weeks. First, I determined the cultural responsiveness of the text I planned for my lessons by using the responsive dots, assessing literature for CLR chart, and culturally and linguistically responsive teaching and learning. Next, I taught my lessons tracking student engagement through observation. I tracked student engagement during whole group reading while my partnership teacher read. If students expressed interest in the story by actively participating and listening, they received a check mark. If they touched or talked to other students or moved around, they received an X. I tracked student engagement during small group reading by assessing them through choral and echo reading strategies. If they were actively participating, they received a check mark. If they were not participating, they received an X. After completing each reading, I administered student surveys. The survey included 4 questions. Are you excited about learning? Do you feel like you can relate to a person or character in the story? Would you recommend the story to a friend or a family member? How would you rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10? To ensure students remained anonymous, I did not have them write their names on the surveys. When collecting data, I assigned each student a number. I determined that 4 out of 5 of the texts I used were considered culturally authentic. One text, Behind Rebel Lines, was determined to be culturally generic. All texts were used for literacy instruction during this lesson segment were culturally responsive. The survey shows that most students were engaged in the text we were reading. The first question was, does this story make you feel excited about learning? 80% of students reported that they were excited about learning, and 20% said maybe, responding to One Crazy Summer. In response to the same question for Behind Rebel Lines, 54% answered yes, 38% maybe, and 8% no. For Harriet Tubman, 77% said yes, and 23% said maybe. For Clara Barton, 58% replied yes, 33% replied maybe, and 9% replied no. For Elizabeth Blackwell, 55% responded yes, 33% responded maybe, and 12% responded no. The most significant finding I noticed was that the higher the rating for the culturally responsive text, the more students replied with yes. The lowest rated text had at least one student respond no to the question. This supports the idea that the more culturally responsive the text, the greater the student interest engagement is. Question 2 on the chart asked, is the text content, subject, or point relevant to target's audience experience, interest, and knowledge? I think it's important to point out that some students were able to connect to specific texts more than others. Rubine Sims Bishop said, "It's not just children who have been underrepresented and marginalized who need those books. It's also children who find their mirrors in books. Some students can always find their mirrors in books, so they need to see windows or a view from somebody else's perspective. On the contrary, some students do not always have mirrors in the books they read. It is essential to provide text where all students can see characters like themselves that reflect their own culture and be able to experience from another's perspective." Question 3 asked, would you recommend this story to a family or friend? Across all 5 texts, not one student said that they would recommend this to a family or a friend. I believe that the results indicate that students felt a personal connection to text and therefore would recommend it to a family or friend because they thought that they could connect to it as well. When examining responses to question 4, how would you rate the story, I would consider any rating above a 7 a positive rating. The 2 texts that received lower responses were Clara and Elizabeth Blackwell. Although they are still culturally authentic, these 2 texts had lower culturally responsive ratings than One Crazy Summer and Harriet Tubman. These results support the idea that the higher the culturally responsive rating of the text, the more learners were engaged during reading and literacy instruction. Observational notes that I made during whole group and small group reading showed that students were engaged. I noted a few disengaged students during whole group reading of Behind Rebel Lines and small group instruction for Elizabeth Blackwell. I found these results interesting because they support the results from the above that the more culturally authentic a text is, the more engaged students are. Overall, students were engaged and focused throughout literacy instruction during the 3 weeks. This research project's overall objective was to find if learning engagement is increased when culturally authentic texts are used during instruction. Before this research project, I observed that students had difficulty paying attention to texts we were reading because they couldn't connect in a meaningful way. I wanted to see if using culturally responsive text would increase engagement, and they did. More importantly, my results showed that the more culturally authentic the text, the higher the engagement. As a future educator teaching in a diverse classroom, I plan to use equitable teaching strategies such as culturally relevant texts in my classroom. By doing so, every student will have the opportunity to identify with the text, creating a deeper understanding and better learning outcomes. I have had such a positive and great experience in the MAT program, and I feel prepared to teach, and I look forward to having my own classroom hopefully sometime very soon. I plan on continuing to develop new skills that I think will help with my teaching and with my classroom. I would love to continue to learn more about how to implement project-based and inquiry-based learning. I look forward to taking professional development classes and seminars. I want to create a teaching profile where I add all of the materials that I've created for lessons so I can showcase my teaching style to future employers. Organization, my short-term goals are for me to get organized this summer for the classroom once I secure a teaching position. And then one that I think is most important is classroom management. I've been trying to develop my classroom management plan and reading books on classroom management because I do think that it is one of the most important things to have in order to have a positive learning environment. So this is my number one goal in putting it together this summer so I am prepared for my first year of teaching. Thank you so much for such a great experience.